Hello and welcome to this IGCSE Geography lesson. This is our first lesson. So we are going to be following the IGCSE Cambridge International Syllabus. So we'll begin in just a moment. I'll go over a few things that you'll need for the course. It's going to be a lot of lessons. It's going to be a lot of work. This is a 2-year course. Cambridge International does offer a field work option or a non-field work option. So that's something that you can think about. And this is something that is in the introductory material that has been put up on the website. Okay, so we're going to look at population and settlement as the first part of the course. And we're going to do a couple of lessons on population dynamics. Okay, so we do have a lot to unpack today. Quite a long lesson, quite a lot of examples. But anybody who's taken any of my courses on this site know that I'd love to give you more information than you need and more examples than you need, rather than risk giving you too few examples. So first of all, what do you need for this course? Well, I highly recommend buying the text. Now the one I've got pictured there is the one that I'm going to be referring to. If I give you page numbers, it will be from this text, but there are other ones you can buy. Any Cambridge IGCSE Geography text, O-level text is fine. But yeah, I would recommend buying the one that is that we're using. Okay. I would also recommend a notebook of some kind, something to take notes in. There will be questions, review questions in the text. Some we will do in the lessons, but we're not going to do every last little activity in the text on videos because we would just never get through the material. So yeah, and I would keep a record of all assignments, all worksheets. I should have put notebook / and folder to keep everything in one spot. Or a file on your computer if you don't like using hard bits of paper. And yeah, because when you go for revision, even if you follow through with the whole course and sit the exam, you just have everything in one spot. Patience and perseverance. Some of these lessons are going to be quite long. Some of them will be longer than others. But one lesson is designed to probably cover a couple of sessions in a classroom. So some will be an hour, some will be more. Don't ever feel like you've got to sit and do this in one sitting. Stop when you need to. Take a break and then come back. Okay. Take the recordings in sessions. Like I said, you don't need to complete the session in one sitting. I will provide worksheets, exam type questions with each recording. So I would highly encourage you to do those. You can always email me and I can have a look at them as well, or book a session with me. Okay, so this session today will actually cover up to about page 7 of the above text. Before you get a text, look at the headings. You should have gotten a copy of a scheme of work and the syllabus, so just make sure that the headings are the same. They might be in a different order, but as long as the headings and the information is the same, that's fine. Okay. So we'll begin. We have a few key questions today. We'll probably do more than these. We're going to look at the world population and how rapidly the world population has increased. We're going to look at the reasons for the rapid population increase. And a big one, what are some of the causes for a change in the size of the population? There are loads. Okay, so we're going to begin with that, actually. We're going to talk about the rapid increase in the world population. So it says during the period of population growth, during the early period, the population growth was very slow. When the domestication of plants and animals began, the population was not more than 5 million people. Now we're talking prehistoric times. So there are more people that live in London than lived in the whole planet at this time. However, with the improvement in technology, the world carrying capacity, and we'll talk about what carrying capacity is in a bit, increased. And by 1800, the first billion was achieved. So it took from the beginning of time when humans were first sort of thought to inhabit the planet up to 1800 to reach the first billion. Now, it only took 130 years after that to reach the second billion. Okay, so by 1930, the world population hit 2 billion. Now, currently, in 2025, the world population is at 8.2 billion people. I believe we are supposed to hit 9 billion by about 2045. There's various estimates on that. Okay. So if we look at this graph, this is actually from the text as well, the number of years to add a billion. So again, the first billion took all of human history up to the year 1800 to hit 1 billion. But the second billion came at a much more rapid pace. 130 years later, we were at 2 billion. Now, if you look at the third billion by 1960, so that only took 30 years from 2 billion to 3 billion. 3 billion to 4 billion, even fewer, 14 years. 4 billion to 5 billion, 13 years. And subsequently, we are adding a billion to the world population about every 12 years. Now you can see that we are still growing, but we are growing at a slower rate. It's sustained. I believe the estimate is that we are going to continue growing. We should peak at about 10 billion, and then the world population is supposed to start to go down. All right, hopefully. Because we cannot sustain a billion people every 12 years. Okay, so there are some questions here. I would suggest that you stop the recording here and look at these. So the first one is, how many billions of years did it take for the world to reach the population of 1 billion? You can answer that in a sentence. You don't have to add up the years. Compare the lines showing the second billion and the third billion, and what do you notice about the amount of years it takes to reach the next billion between those two? And what is happening to the rate of growth? Is this positive or negative? Okay, so we're going to continue on, but please, if you want to, stop the recording and go ahead and do the questions. Excuse me. Okay, so some of the reasons for a rapid increase in population. Well, we've had a decline in death rates. Improvements in medicine and healthcare, advances in medical knowledge, vaccines, antibiotics, and sanitation have led to a significant decrease in mortality rates, especially infant mortality. I would like to tell the story of my great-grandmother, who had 14 children. Now, they were agricultural families. They tended to have larger families. They were also Catholic, so they didn't believe in birth control. But they were right on the cusp of that breakthrough of infant mortality had gone way down. So after her generation, people started having far fewer children because most of them survived into adulthood. In her era or before, not so many. Better nutrition, increased food production and distribution have reduced famine and malnutrition, leading to longer lifespans. Public health measures to access to clean water has improved. Hygiene practices have also contributed to lower death rates. Okay, now that's an overall picture of the world. You know, we turn on the news and we see that there are places in the world where people still are living in quite appalling conditions. However, overall, these things are improving. We do see famine in areas in sub-Saharan Africa, but we do see a lot of relief aid that does get out there, so it does help. So the effects are still devastating, but hopefully not as devastating as they were before that happened. Okay, another reason for a rapid increase is high birth rates and high infant survival rates. So in many parts of the world, particularly in less developed countries, birth rates have remained high due to cultural, religious, and economic factors. In agricultural societies, larger families are often beneficial for labor purposes, which encourages the high fertility rate. So again, my great grandmother's generation, they had 14 children. Everybody had a job on the farm. Okay, carrying capacity. This is an important vocabulary word. So what is carrying capacity? Well, it refers to the maximum number of individuals that an environment can sustainably support based on available resources such as food, water, and shelter. Okay. How does that impact the population or the growth of the population? Human ingenuity has expanded the carrying capacity of the earth. So through inventions, through agricultural innovations like the Green Revolution, the population has continued to grow because more people can occupy a certain area of the earth because the land, it's greater efficiency. However, there is ongoing concern about whether the earth can continue to support the rapid increasing population without severe environmental degradation. And yeah, and we are seeing the effects of climate change. Demographers. What are demographers? Well, they're scientists who study population dynamics, including birth rates, death rates, migration, and aging. So aging is a big one because people are actually living longer. They use tools like the demographic transition model, or the DTM, and we are going to spend quite a lot of time on that and show some examples of it, to explain how countries move from high birth rates and death rates to lower rates as they develop economically. Demographers also assess the impact of population growth on resources, urbanization, and policies aimed at controlling population sizes, such as family planning initiatives. Okay, now with population growth, something that is very important is resource management. So our food supply. Rapid population growth increases the demand for food because people need to eat, putting pressure on agricultural systems. This can lead to issues like food insecurity and the need for innovations, such as the Green Revolution. Now, water resources. A growing population requires more water for drinking, agriculture, and industry, which can lead to water scarcity, especially in arid regions. And then energy demand. Increased population means higher demand for energy, leading to concerns about sustainable energy production and the depletion of fossil fuels. Okay, so urbanization and infrastructure. So urban growth. So population growth often results in rapid urbanization because people need places to live, where cities expand to accommodate more people. This can strain infrastructure, housing, and public services, leading to overcrowding and informal settlements. You see this in countries like Brazil with the favelas, shanty towns, where for various reasons people they just put these up because there's not enough housing to take care of everybody, for everybody to have a high-rise apartment. Transportation and services. Expanding populations require enhanced transportation networks, healthcare, and educational facilities, which can be challenging for governments to provide, especially in developing countries. Now, the environmental impact. Deforestation and habitat loss. To accommodate population growth, forests are often cleared for agriculture or urban development, leading to biodiversity loss and environmental degradation. Pollution. Increased population leads to more waste and pollution, affecting air, water, and soil quality. And climate change. Now, at the time that this has been made, we have just come out of the Los Angeles fires, which climate change is not the sole cause, but they're seeing more of it based on the climate they're changing. More people mean higher greenhouse gas emissions, contributing to climate change and its associated impacts. Look at economic development. So labor force. So growing population can provide a larger workforce, and there are some positives here, potentially boosting economic development. However, if the population grows faster than job creation, it can lead to unemployment and poverty. And demographic dividend. Countries with a youthful population can benefit from economic growth if they invest in education and job creation, turning potential population pressures into opportunities. Now, Spain went through what they call a brain drain about 10 years ago because their economy suffered greatly. They had something like 25, 30% unemployment. So graduates, their best and brightest, were leaving because they thought, well, we can't find suitable jobs here. We're going to go to Australia, New Zealand, Britain, wherever we can to get a job in our field. And it's unfortunate when that happens because a country spends time educating these people and then they end up going to another place. But you can't blame them because they need to have a job because they need to work. Okay, and social and political changes. So we've got healthcare and education again. So rapid population growth can overwhelm the healthcare systems and education facilities, making it difficult to provide quality service with governance. Managing large populations requires effective governance to ensure equitable distribution of resources and maintain social stability. And then you've got migration as well. Sorry, I got a bit of a sore throat. Population pressures can lead to internal and international migration, which can have social and economic implications for both origin and destination areas. I came to the UK in 2002 because there was a huge teacher shortage. I came from a country that had kind of a surplus of teachers, so not an overwhelming one, but so it didn't really hurt my country, me going. But if you take from developing countries, it can hurt their infrastructure. Okay, so then back to carrying capacity. The concept of carrying capacity is crucial in understanding the balance between population size and resource availability. When a population exceeds its carrying capacity, it can lead to resource depletion and environmental collapse. Now, when this starts to happen, a lot of countries enforce, they try to take action. We'll talk about the China one-child rule, which they have now since repealed, but that was an attempt to keep the population down to a certain level. Okay, so now we're going to look at the history of population growth again. We looked at that chart at the beginning, and we know that it took the whole of human history up to the year 1800 to hit the first billion. Okay, so our early human history was hunter-gatherer societies. So pre the 10,000 BCE up to 10,000 BCE. Human population growth was slow due to high mortality rates and low life expectancy. The global population was estimated to be only a few million. Okay, now they didn't do censuses back then, but yes, people probably only fortunate to make it to adulthood. There are a lot of hazards out there, a lot of animals that get killed. Mortality rates were incredibly high. Then there was an agricultural revolution around 10,000 BCE. The shift from nomadic lifestyles to settled farming communities led to a gradual population increase. People didn't have to worry about running from dinosaurs all the time. They were able to settle, get control of animals, create their own food. So with a steady food supply, stable living. And the people started living a bit longer and the population increased. So better food production and stable living conditions supported more significant population growth. Still not what it is today, though. Okay, so about the time of the Roman Empire, the world population is estimated to have been about 300 million. From there to the medieval period, the population grew slowly due to persistent diseases, famines, and wars. We had something called the Black Death. Well, there were two of them, actually. It was a catastrophic plague in Europe, significantly reduced the population, killing about 25 to 30% of the population in affected areas. Then, like we said before, 1800, we reached the first billion. So that's a big milestone for the planet. The Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th century, marked by advancements in technology, agriculture, and medicine. This era led to a dramatic increase in mortality rates and an increase in population growth. People didn't live in the healthiest of conditions then. So you had high birth rates, but again, you had high mortality rates. So it took thousands of years for the world to reach 1 billion, a milestone achieved around 1800, as we've said before. Now you get to the 20th century and you have a population boom. 2 billion. After the first billion, it only took 127 years to add another billion due to industrial and medical advancements. So we started getting vaccines, antibiotics. Doctors are able to fight diseases a lot more efficiently. 3 billion by 1960. The population hit 3 billion in just 33 years, showing how growth accelerated. That's something called the Green Revolution. So you had innovations in agriculture during the mid-20th century helped sustain the increasing population. Okay, now we get to the late 20th and early 21st century, where we are today. At 4 billion by 1974, 5 billion by 1987, 6 billion by 1999. The world population continued to rise rapidly, about 1 billion every 12 years. 7 billion in 2011. I remember the day that was officially declared. Just 12 years after reaching 6 billion, the population hit 7 billion. Present day, so as of, 2023, the world population is over 8 billion. Now in 2025, we are at about 8.2 billion. So the population growth rate declined. While the population is still growing, and quite a quickly rate, the rate of growth is slowed in many parts of the world due to lower birth rates and increasing life expectancy. Okay, so just to recap that. So 1800, the global population, I'll try that again, global population hits about 1 billion. 1927, we hit our 2 billion mark. 1960, we hit 3 billion. 1974, we hit 4 billion. 1987, we hit 5 billion. 1999, 6 billion. 2011, we hit 7 billion. 2023, over 8 billion. So the future projections. The population is expected to continue growing, but at a slower rate. Some projections suggest reaching 9 billion by 2037. Okay, so recent demographic changes. Population explosion of the 1960s. What happened there? Why? It's called the baby boomer generation. So that would have been my parents. Population explosion refers to the rapid increase in the world population that occurred during the mid-20th century, particularly noticeable from the 1960s. The period was marked by significant advancements in medicine, sanitation, and agricultural. For example, again, the Green Revolution, which we will talk about later in the course, which drastically reduced death rates without an immediate corresponding decline in birth rates. The global population rose from about 3 billion in 1960 to 4 billion in 1974, showcasing the fastest population growth rate in history. So, where is the greatest amount of population growth occurring? So these are the demographic changes. Now, there is a big shift in about the time of the Second World War. So developing countries is where the most population growth is occurring. The highest rates of population growth are occurring in Africa, South Asia, and other parts of Latin America. Countries like Nigeria, India, and Ethiopia can continue to experience high fertility rates. In Africa, this continent has the fastest growing population with a high birth rate and a relatively young population structure. Africa's population is projected to double by 2050. Now, in Asia, although growth rates in countries like India remain high, actually, India now has overtaken China as the most populated country on the planet. There has been noticeable slowing in population growth in China due to strict population control policies, such as the one-child policy, though it has been relaxed in recent years. It's actually been taken away. But I don't think they can have as many children as they like in China. I think they still have limits. A shift in growth patterns. So historically, Europe and North America experienced significant growth during the Industrial Revolution. Today, these regions show stagnation or even decline due to lower fertility rates and aging populations. Okay, so we've got this thing called demographic momentum. So what is that? So demographic momentum is the tendency for a population to continue growing after fertility rates decline because of a relatively high proportion of young people in the population. This means that even when countries implement family planning measures and fertility rates drop, the population continues to grow for several decades due to the young age structure. For example, many African countries, despite efforts to lower birth rates and youthful population, ensures continued growth. Okay, so what are some current trends? What's happening today? There's a decline in global fertility rates. Where the global population is still increasing, the rate of growth has slowed in many parts of the world due to declining fertility rates. The trend is especially notable in developed regions and emerging economies like China and Brazil. People are just having fewer children because of development and higher cost of living. You have an aging population. So this is particularly true in Japan. In contrast, many developed countries, such as Japan and those in Europe, are experiencing population decline or very slow growth due to aging population and low birth rates. And then we got urbanization. More people are moving to urban areas, especially in developing countries, leading to the rapid expansion of cities and the development of megacities. So places like Tokyo, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, those ones that are in the multi-billions, those are megacities. Okay, so when we notice a major demographic change, what happens implication-wise? Well, there can be a strain on resources, depending on if the population grows quite rapidly. Rapid population growth in developing countries can strain resources, such as food, water, and housing, leading to challenges in sustainable development. Economic opportunities and challenges can also come about. So a youthful population can provide economic growth potential through the demographic dividend, but this requires substantial investment in education and job creation. And then you've got policy responses. Governments in rapidly growing regions are focusing on family planning, education, and health services to manage population growth. While those in aging regions are addressing the challenge of declining populations by encouraging immigration and offering incentives for higher fertility rates. Okay, so just a bit of a summary of what we've done so far. So the 1960s population explosion was driven by reduced mortality without an immediate drop in birth rates, especially in developing countries. Today, the greatest population growth is in Africa and South Asia, while many developed regions face stagnation or decline. Demographic momentum explains why populations can continue to grow even after birth rates fall. And the global trend shows slowing growth rates through regional differences, though regional differences persist. with the implications of these changes affecting economic development, resource use, and social policies. Okay, so we're going to talk about divergence of growth patterns. So again, after World War II, population growth patterns diverged, meaning they changed significantly between more developed countries, what we call MDCs, and less developed countries, LDCs. So slowing population growth in more developed countries. So MDCs are in post-World War II. Economic recovery and industrialization were a key factor. After World War II, many developed countries experienced rapid industrial growth and economic recovery because their infrastructure was completely destroyed, so they had to rebuild it. This led to higher living standards, better education, increased urbanization, all of which are associated with lower fertility rates. Improved access to contraception. The post-war period saw widespread availability of contraception and family planning services. There's various reasons for that. You have, the declining power of the church, and again, people just having fewer children. This gave couples in MDCs more control over the number and spacing of their children. You got changing social roles. Women's role in society began to shift significantly. More women entered the workforce, pursued higher education, and delayed marriage and childbirth, contributing to a decline in birth rates. Prior to World War I, the World Wars really changed women's roles. It contributed to women's liberation because they had to work outside of the home. Now, women did work outside of the home before that, but they tended to work very domestic jobs. The World Wars, they were required in factories and did a lot more manual labor because the men were sent off to fight in the war. Women before that were kind of considered the main role of the woman before that was to be a wife and a mother and, a domestic person. Anything else had to be done with the permission of their husband. But after the World Wars, this significantly changed. And then we had something called the creation of the welfare states. Many developed countries established welfare systems, including healthcare, pensions, and unemployment benefits. Okay, the UK is a welfare state. As a result, the economic necessity to have large families as a form of Social Security diminished. Okay. Now we have a post-war baby boom. Although there was a temporary baby boom immediately after the war, usually after war there is, late 1940s to early 1960s, fertility rates soon declined as countries transitioned into the second stage of the demographic transition model, or DTM. We're going to talk about what that is. This was characterized by lower birth and death rates. Okay, we have urbanization. As more people moved to cities, the cost of raising children increased. In urban environments, large families became less economically advantageous compared to rural settings. It generally costs a lot more to live in the cities in an urban area than it does in a rural area. There's some exceptions. Okay, so again, under the title of increasing population in less developed countries, or LDCs, in post-World War II, there were some medical advances. So your lesser developed countries did benefit from these. So one of the most significant reasons for the population explosion in LDCs was the spread of modern medicine and public health initiatives after World War II. Vaccination programs, antibiotics, and improved sanitation drastically reduced infant mortality rates and increased life expectancy. Again, we have the Green Revolution we've talked about before. Advances in agriculture, particularly the Green Revolution in the 1960s, led to increased food production, which supported larger populations and reduced famine in many LDCs. So increased the food supply, so it was more steady. So again, more people were surviving. Okay, now They had LDCs have more limited access to family planning. There's cultural reasons for that. Possibly it's, affordability. This is unlike MDCs. Many LDCs had limited access to family planning and contraception. Cultural, religious, and educational factors also played a role in keeping fertility rates high. So you had high birth rates. In many LDCs, children were seen as an economic asset, providing labor for family farms and security for parents in old age. This cultural preference for large families persisted even as death rates declined. And then delayed social change. So in the MDCs, we had all this social change, the role of the women change. In LDCs, it does change. It is starting to change, but it's a lot slower. So social and economic changes that tend to lower fertility rates, such as improved education for women, urbanization, and economic development, were slower to take hold in many LDCs compared to MDCs. Okay, so divergent demographic transition stages. So MDCs were further along the demographic transition model, transitioning from stage 3, declining birth and death rates, to stage 4, low birth rates and death rates. I believe currently in the UK, our birth and death rates are right about equal. So we've got a sustained population. LDCs were still in stage 2, high birth rates, but falling death rates, resulting in population growth. So we have economic and social impacts of this. So in MDCs, slower population growth allowed for economic stability and in the development of comprehensive welfare systems. In LDCs, rapid population growth often outpaced economic development, leading to challenges in providing adequate healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Okay, so we're just going to summarize this section a little bit about diverging growth patterns. So the slowing population growth in MDCs post-World War II was driven by socioeconomic changes, increased access to contraception, and shifts in societal roles. In contrast, LDCs experienced rapid population growth due to medical advancements, agricultural improvements, and high birth rates, which persisted despite falling death rates. These differences in demographic patterns reflect the varying stages of economic development and social transformation, can't talk tonight for some reason, between two groups of countries. Okay, so here we have an exercise where we're looking at a graph. This is one of the sources that graphs are sources that you might have to answer questions on. Photographs as well, but we're going to stick to some graphs in this lesson. So since 1950, what is the general trend of population growth in terms of where it is the greatest? Okay, and it says give 2 reasons why. So if you want, you may pause the recording, try to answer the question, go back through the presentation, or if you have been an amazing student and already brought the text, go back through the text, talk about where the population is basically growing fastest, and give us 2 reasons why. Okay, we're going to carry on. So recent demographic change. So again, just the fastest growth in population is taking place in least developed countries, sometimes called the LDCs. These are the poorest countries in the world. The rich countries' MEDCs have been experiencing the slowest population growth after the Second World War. The highest ever recorded population growth rate was in the 1960s at a rate of 2.4% per year, and that is a population explosion. By 2012, it had reduced to 1.2% per year. Although this is the case, the demographic momentum, or number of people added each year, remains high because the number of women in childbearing age is still high. And according to Population Reference Bureau, the rich countries will experience very little or no population growth this century, and the growth will be mainly in form of migration. Okay, so here we have like the 10 largest countries in terms of population size by 1960, by 2016. Okay, and an estimate by 2050. So you can see a country like China, yeah, in millions, over a billion, 1.3 billion. By 2050, it looks like it's going to grow, but not by as much. If we look at India, 1.329 billion. So this in 2016, they hadn't overtaken China yet, but by 2050, it's looking like 1.7 billion. So you can see China's population is estimated to start going down, whereas India's is going to shoot up quite high. The USA, that's an interesting one. That looks like it's going to grow quite a bit. Indonesia, quite significant growth. We're not going to go through all of these. But if we look at more of our Russia, I think Russia is one of the few that might actually go down. Mexico, so not here. Okay, but you can see that the basic main idea of that is showing that your LADCs or LCDs, the population is going to grow quicker in those countries than the more developed nations. Okay, now causes of a change in population size. So what causes this to happen? So population size changes due to a combination of factors. We've got birth rates, death rates, rate of natural change, natural increase, a natural decrease, immigration rate, emigration rate, and net migration. So we will talk about what all those mean. Each of these factors plays a critical role in shaping the demographic structure of a country. So we'll discuss each in detail and provide examples from both more economically developed countries and less economically developed countries. Okay, so you have some key factors influencing your population size. So your birth rate, that's going to definitely impact your population size. So what is the definition of the birth rate? It's not just people born. It's the number of live births per 1,000 people per year. So again, we were talking about how LDCs or LCDs have higher birth rates. So common in LDCs due to limited access to contraception, lower education levels, especially among women, and cultural preferences for larger families. Now, lower birth rates, common in MEDCs due to better family planning, higher education levels, urbanization, and changes in societal values. We get our death rate. That again impacts your population. So again, like the birth rate, the number of deaths per 1,000 people per year. So high death rate often found in LDCs as well due to poor healthcare, sanitation, and nutrition. Now, our MEDCs, or more developed nations, have a lower death rate due to advanced healthcare systems, better living conditions, and improved nutrition. Okay, that's something called the rate of natural change. So what is that? So that's the difference between the birth rate and the death rate. So X amount of people are born in a year, X amount of people die in a year. So the difference between the two is your rate of natural change. So natural increase is when the birth rate is higher than the death rate, leading to population growth. If it's a natural decrease, when the death rate exceeds the birth rate, leading to population decline. Immigration. We hear a lot about this in the news. And a lot of people, and some, well, in the UK, we need immigration. Some countries, we definitely need immigration because there's a stagnating population and it's going to start to decline. So the number of people entering the country per 1,000 population per year. I like keeping it in thousands. So a high immigration rate can increase the population size and is often seen in MEDCs due to better economic opportunities and political stability. Now, the emigration rate, the number of people leaving a country per 1,000 population per year. A high emigration rate can decrease the population size, often seen in LDCs, where people seek better opportunities abroad. Now, the rate of net migration. So, what does that mean? That's the difference between the number of immigrants and emigrants per 1,000 people. So, your immigrants are people coming in, your emigrants are people leaving. So, positive net migration. More people entering than leaving, leading to population growth. So obviously then negative net migration, more people leaving than entering, leading to population decline. Let's look at the UK. So where does the UK fit on this? So the birth rate. The UK has a relatively low birth rate, 11 births per 1,000 people. Due to widespread access to contraception, high levels of education, and changing societal norms where families tend to have fewer children. Now, the death rate. The death rate is also low, 9 deaths per 1,000 people due to advanced healthcare and higher living standards. So you can see our death rate is lower than our birth rate, but not by a heck of a lot. So natural change. So the natural increase is modest because the birth rate is only slightly higher than the death rate. We've got immigration and emigration. The UK experiences positive net migration with a significant number of immigrants entering the country for economic opportunities. This contributes to population growth despite the low natural increase. Now, we do have people that emigrate out of the UK for other countries, but it is not as many that come in. Okay, so let's look at Nigeria, which is a different example. Now, the birth rate. So Nigeria has a high birth rate. So it's about 35 births per 1,000 people, largely due to limited access to family planning, cultural norms favoring large families, and a higher percentage of the population in childbearing age. Now, the death rate. The death rate is higher than in MEDCs. It's about 12 deaths per 1,000 people. But it has been decreasing due to improvements in healthcare and sanitation, because the UK is only 9, so it's higher than the UK, but again, not by a lot. So the natural change. Nigeria experiences a high natural increase because the birth rate significantly exceeds the death rate. And then migration. Nigeria has higher emigration rates as people leave for better opportunities abroad, but the high natural increase still leads to rapid population growth. So people are leaving, but not as many as they would need to counteract the higher birth rate. And their death rate is relatively low. Okay, so let's just summarize all of that again. So changes in population size are influenced by birth and death rates, natural increase or decrease, and migration. In MEDCs like the UK, low birth rate and death rates combined with positive net migration lead to controlled population growth. In contrast, LDCs like Nigeria experience rapid population growth due to high birth rates and natural increase, despite higher emigration rates. Understanding these dynamics helps explain global demographic trends and their implications for development, resources, and planning. Okay, so whatever next. Okay, so we've just got some statistics here that you can look at. Birth and death rates of the world by 2016. So, yeah, per 1,000, you're looking at a birth rate of 20 for the whole world, a death rate of 8. So again, the world population is still significantly growing, but it is tapering off. Okay, so we're finally going to get into this thing called the demographic transition model. I've been referring to it through the whole lesson, and now we're going to really dive into it. So what is it, first of all? This is a model that shows how death rate and birth rates of a country changes as a country develops. The model has 5 stages, namely stage 1, high stationary, and we'll talk about what all these are. Stage 2, early expanding. Stage 3 is late expanding. Stage 4 is low stationary. And stage 5 is natural decrease. Okay, so stage 1, the high stationary stage, what does that mean? That means birth rates are high and stable. Death rates are also very high, but are fluctuating due to factors such as famine, disease, and war. As a result of high birth and death rates, the population grows very slowly. Infant mortality is very high, while life expectancy is very low. This is not a fun state to be in. Countries like pre-industrial and mainly practice agriculture. Okay, a modern example. Actually, there aren't any countries that fit this model, but no country today is considered fully in stage 1 due to global advancements. So the world has moved on from stage 1. But, however, remote indigenous tribes, such as some Amazon or parts of Papua New Guinea, might exhibit stage 1 like characteristics due to isolation from modern advancements. But this is quite rare. Why these societies resemble high stage birth rates due to lack of contraception and cultural norms, and high death rates due to limited access to modern medicine and high levels of disease and malnutrition. Okay, so what happens to a country when it transitions out of stage 1 to stage 2? Now, most countries have done this, at least this. Okay, so the key factors in the transition: improved medical knowledge, introduction of vaccines and antibiotics drastically reduced infant mortality rates, especially infant and child mortality. Medical advancements such as the germ theory of disease led to better understanding of control of epidemics. And sanitation improvements. Installation of clean water supplies and sewage systems helped prevent waterborne diseases like cholera. Cholera was rife in the UK during the Industrial Revolution. And yeah, just with sanitation and good plumbing, it reduced the rates. Public health campaigns educated populations on hygiene practices. Okay, there's also agricultural advances that help a country transition from stage 1 to stage 2. So the agricultural revolution improved food security through innovations like crop rotation, selective breeding, and the use of fertilizers. So what is that? Crop rotation. The Industrial Revolution actually began in agriculture. Now, farmers used to have to let's say they had an acre of land. So they would only maybe plant on 75% of it, and they would leave 25% with nothing on it. And they call that laying fallow. The reason for that is that soil does take time to regenerate it. And if you keep planting stuff on it, you're taking the nutrients out, so the soil becomes useless. So they would rotate their crops every year. So the following year, the bit that was fallow would get planted on, and another part of the field of that acre would be left fallow. Now, somebody, I can't remember his actual name, but they called him Lord Turnip because he realized that if you plant turnips, that does not take from the soil, it actually adds to it. So now suddenly you can use your whole field to grow food, which increases the food supply. Okay, so that's an agricultural advance. Selective breeding was actually breeding animals together to make them bigger naturally. Okay, use of fertilizers, again, replenishing the nutrients in the soil with fertilizers so you can use it for longer without having to leave land with nothing on it. Okay, so all those things help increase the food supply. The Industrial Revolution. Okay, so in many countries, the Industrial Revolution provided the infrastructure needed for widespread social improvements, including better transportation of food and medical supplies. It took a while, but it did happen. Okay, so some historical context here. Europe and North America. These regions transitioned to stage 2 during the 18th and 19th century, so during the Industrial Revolution. Okay, centuries with the onset of the Industrial Revolution. Now, developing countries, many African, Asian, and Latin American countries transitioned later during the 20th century due to the spread of medical and agricultural technology from more developed nations. So once a nation goes through this, other nations can go through it quicker. Let's call it reinventing the wheel, if other nations are willing to help. The last of the countries to transition from stage 1 to stage 2. Afghanistan and parts of sub-Saharan Africa were among the last regions to transition out of stage 1 during the late 20th century. Okay, so Afghanistan, which we heard quite a lot about in the news, until the late 20th century, Afghanistan had high birth and death rates due to limited access to healthcare and persistent conflicts. However, gradual improvements in healthcare systems, international aid, and better sanitation started reducing the death rate, making the transition to stage 2. So the birth rate in Afghanistan in the 1980s was 45 per 1,000. Before the 1980s. By the 1980s, it was 22 per 1,000 in the early 21st century, and the death rate had significantly dropped due to international humanitarian efforts and healthcare improvements. Sub-Saharan Africa is another example of a country that was an area that was quite late to transition out of stage 1. So some countries in this region have only recently begun to transition fully out of stage 1, primarily due to persistent challenges like poverty, diseases, for example, HIV and AIDS, and political instability. For example, Niger had high birth and death rates until recent decades, but is now showing signs of transition as healthcare and food security improve. The birth rate remains high, 45 per 1,000, but with declining death rates, 11 per 1,000, signaling the move to stage 2. Okay, so the transition from stage 1 to stage 2 marks a critical shift in a country's demographic profile. So you have a population explosion, possibly a lag in the decline of birth rates results in rapid population growth, economic and social changes. So the need for better infrastructure, education, and job creation becomes urgent as the population surges, and health improvements. Declining mortality rates improve overall life expectancy and quality of life. Okay, so let's go to stage 2, and this is called the early expanding stage. So what happens at stage 2? The death rate starts falling while birth rates remain high. As a result, the population grows very rapidly at this stage. Infant mortality rate falls while life expectancy increases. There's a considerable rural-urban migration at this stage. The reasons for falling death rates are improved medical care and vaccinations, improved sanitation and water supply, improved food production and supply, improved transport, which enables movement of food and medical services, and a decrease in infant mortality. Okay, so that's stage 2. So how does a country jump from stage 2 to stage 3? So the shift from stage 2 to stage 3 in the demographic transition model occurs when a country experiences a decline in birth rates because they can't. They don't need to have as many children to replenish the population, following the earlier decline in death rates during stage 2. As a result, population growth slows down, although it remains positive. Okay, so again, the country's transitioning from stage 2 to stage 3. Urbanization. As countries industrialize, more people move to urban areas. In cities, large families are often less economically advantageous due to higher living costs and smaller living spaces, leading to lower birth rates. Improved access to education. So increased educational opportunities, especially for women, lead to better understanding of family planning and contraception. And female empowerment through education and employment reduces the dependency on large families for economic support. There's a lot of economic changes when you transition from stage 2 to stage 3. As a country develops economically, the focus shifts from agricultural labor, where large families are beneficial, to industrial service sectors, which require less manual labor and smaller family sizes. Rising incomes reduce the economic necessity for large families. And access to contraception and healthcare. Widespread availability of contraception allows families to plan and limit the number of children. Healthcare improvements ensure child survival, reducing the need for large families to hedge against child mortality. Okay, so here's some countries transitioning from stage 2 to stage 3 or that have made it through. Some of these have even gone beyond it, but Mexico. Late 20th century, so the 1970s to the 1990s. So what did Mexico do to jump to stage 3? They had increase in urbanization significantly as Mexico industrialized. Government policies promoted family planning and access to contraception became more widespread. The fertility rate dropped from about 6.5 children per woman in the 1960s to about 2.2 by the 1990s. Okay, India. So their transition period from 2 to 3 was 1980s to present. So they're still kind of there. So again, India had rapid urbanization, economic development, and better access to healthcare and education contributed to the decline in birth rates. The fertility rate in India decreased from about 5.9 in the 1950s to about 2.2 in 2010. So if they continue along that, their population will start to stagnate and fall. South Korea, there's an interesting one. Their transition period was from 2 to 3, was the 1960s to the 1980s. And their factors, so South Korea's rapid economic growth during this period led to better living standards, access to education and healthcare. And government-sponsored family planning programs successfully reduced fertility rates from about 6.0 per person or per woman in the early 1960s to 2.0 by the 1980s. In Brazil, their transition period was the late 20th century, so 1970s to 2000s. Brazil experienced significant urbanization and improvements in healthcare and education. The fertility rate fell from 6.0 in the 1960s to approximately 1.7 in the 2000s. So that's really low, making it a clear transition to stage 3. Okay, so country goes to stage 3, so what? Why is that important? Well, slower population growth. As birth rates decline, the rate of population increase slows, preventing the issues associated with unchecked population explosions as seen in stage 2. A demographic dividend. Countries transitioning to stage 3 can experience a demographic dividend where a larger portion of the population is in the working age group, potentially boosting economic growth. And then you got societal change. Societal norms evolve as smaller family sizes become more common and the role of women in the workforce increases. So what exactly is stage 3? We've talked about countries that have transitioned from stage 2 into stage 3. So what exactly is stage 3? Well, I'm going to tell you. Okay, so the birth rate begins to fall while life expectancy continues to grow. So birth rate's falling because people are living longer. Well, and people are living longer. The death rates are lower compared to the last stage because the majority of the population are younger. Now, the fall in birth rates, again, is due to use of family planning methods, contraception, sterilization, abortion, and government incentives. A drop in infant mortality, increased mechanization, meaning few workers needed, desire for smaller families in order to have a better lifestyle, and increased number of educated women. Okay, so now stage 3 to stage 4. The shift from stage 3 to stage 4 in the demographic transition model occurs when both birth rates and death rates are low, stabilizing the population size. So in stage 4, the population growth is slow or even negligible. This stage is characterized by a high standard of living, advanced healthcare, and widespread access to education and contraception. Okay, so going from 3 to 4, continued economic development. So advanced economies lead to higher income levels and great job opportunities, further reducing the incentive for large families. The shift from industrial to service and technology-based economies diminishes, and the need for large families as a source of labor. And you've got high education levels. Universal access to education, especially for women, continues to be a critical factor in reducing birth rates. And greater emphasis on career and personal development often delays marriage and childbirth. And then you've got cultural changes. Societal norms increasingly favor smaller families, with personal fulfillment and professional success becoming significant life goals, not just having a massive family. The concept of family planning is deeply ingrained, with parents opting for fewer children to invest more in their upbringing. And then you've got healthcare advancements. Continued improvements in healthcare have reduced infant mortality to very low levels, eliminating the need for large families to ensure child survival. Access to advanced medical care ensures longer life expectancy, stabilizing death rates at low levels. Even government policies as well. In some cases, governments have implemented policies that either encourage smaller families through family planning programs or an attempt to boost birth rates through incentives in countries facing population decline. Okay, so some countries that have transitioned from stage 3 to stage 4. So the United States, they went from stage 3 to stage 4, late 20th century to early 21st century. Now, we're not talking about development. We're talking about a stage with just their population. So, some of the factors. The U.S. experienced sustained economic growth, urbanization, and improvements in healthcare and education throughout the 20th century. The fertility rate declined from about 3.7% in the 1950s to about 1.7% by the 2020s. So widespread access to contraception and changing social attitudes about the family size played significant roles. So people aren't having 4 and 5 children, not much anymore. Japan. So their transition period was from about the 1970s to the 1990s. So again, they went through a period of rapid industrialization and urbanization post-Second World War. They had to, because unfortunately, many of their cities were destroyed in the Second World War, which propelled Japan into stage 4 by the 1970s. A strong focus on education, career opportunities for women, and high living costs in urban areas led to a declining birth rate. Japan is a very, very expensive country to live in. So Japan's fertility rate dropped from 2.0 in the 1950s to 1.3 by the 2000s, contributing to a population decline. Now, Japan also has an aging population, very old population. So they're going to have to maybe think about ways to encourage more children. Germany. So they did this phase from the 1960s to the 1980s. So Germany's post-war recovery, economic boom, and establishment of a welfare state with universal health care and education helped it transition to stage 4. The fertility rate dropped significantly from about 2.5 in the 1960s to 1.5 by the 1980s, stabilizing the population size. South Korea again. So South Korea has gone into stage 4. The transition period was from the 1990s to the 2010s. Okay, again, South Korea's economic miracle led to drastic social changes, including higher education levels and better healthcare. And the fertility rate fell below the replacement level by the late 1990s, reaching about 1.1 in the 2010s, making a clear transition to stage 4. So, what happens when a country goes to stage 4? Why is that important? Well, the population is stable. Population growth stabilizes if birth rates decline to match the death rates, preventing overpopulation. You have an aging population, so low birth rates and high life expectancy lead to an aging population, which poses challenges for healthcare systems, pensions, and the workforce. And policy responses. Governments may introduce policies to encourage higher birth rates, such as parental leave, childcare support, and financial incentives to balance the population structure. Okay, so stage 4 is actually called the low stationary stage. And we are going to also look at stage 5. So basically, it's both death rates and birth rates are low, but birth rates are slightly more. So the UK could be considered stage 4 based on that, because we do have low birth and death rates, but our birth rate is just past the death rate. Death rates rise slightly as majority of the population are older. Age-specific mortality falls while life expectancy continues to improve. Okay, and then you get to stage 5, which is a natural decrease stage. Populations start to go down. So here the birth rates have fallen beyond the death rates. There's no immigration, if there is no immigration, the population will fall. This is seen in countries such as Germany, Belarus, Bulgaria, and Ukraine. So from stage 4 to stage 5 of the demographic transition model, stop saying democratic. So from 4 to 5, this represents a new phase where the birth rate falls below the death rate, leading to a natural population decline. So this might be needed in some countries, like China was looking to decline the population. The stage is characterized by very low fertility rates, aging populations, and potential economic social challenges. Okay, so what happens when you go from stage 4 to stage 5? So your fertility below replacement level. The replacement fertility rate, which keeps the population stable, is approximately 2.1 children per woman. In stage 5 countries experience fertility rates well below this level, often around 1.3 to 1.7. Societal trends such as delayed marriages, fewer children, and increasing childbearing costs contribute to this decline. So again, some people aren't having more children because they simply just can't afford to. We also have an aging population. With low birth rates and high life expectancy, the population skews toward older age groups. An aging population increases dependency ratios as fewer working age individuals support a growing elderly population. This is part of the reason why China removed the one-child rule, because you've got one child then having to help support 2 parents. And then you have urbanization and lifestyle changes. Urban living tends to correlate with smaller family sizes due to space limitations, higher living costs, and lifestyle choices. emphasizing personal freedom and career over large families. Education and career opportunities, especially for women, lead to delayed childbearing and fewer children. So we have economic factors. So in many stage 5 countries, the economic pressures of raising children coupled with the desire for higher living standards discourage larger families. Some countries also face economic stagnation due to a shrinking workforce, further complicating the ability to sustain population growth. We've got cultural shifts that contribute to this. So cultural attitudes in stage 5 societies often support smaller family units and individualism over traditional family structures. In some cases, fertility decline is exacerbated by a lack of interest in marriage or parenthood. Okay, so what are some countries that have jumped from stage 4 to stage 5? Well, you'll probably not be surprised to hear Japan. From the 1990s to the early 2000s, Japan is one of the lowest fertility rates globally, around 1.3. The population peaked in 2008 and has been declining since due to a combination of low birth rates and a high aging population. Japan faces significant challenges such as labor shortages and increased pressure on social welfare systems. Germany, again, they're in the stage 5 category. Germany's fertility rate dropped to around 1.4, and the population began to decline in the late 2000s. Efforts to counteract this trend include policies promoting work-life balance, childcare support, and financial incentives for families. Despite these efforts, demographic decline continues, with a large portion of the population over 65. Italy, there's a new one. Italy's fertility rate is one of the lowest in Europe at about 1.2. Economic difficulties, youth unemployment, and a strong cultural shift towards smaller families have led to population decline. Italy is a very Catholic nation, so that is quite significant because usually the Catholic faith encourages larger families, but that's changed a lot. The aging population has put immense pressure on the pension system and healthcare services. Russia. So they popped into stage 5 at about 2010. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia experienced a sharp decline in birth rates and population growth because their economy just, their inflation and economy just tanked. The fertility rate fell to about 1.5, although government incentives like financial bonuses for second and third children have been implemented to counteract the decline. Despite some recovery in fertility rates, Russia still faces long-term demographic challenges. Okay, so if it goes to stage 5, why is that important? Well, there's an economic impact. A shrinking workforce leads to labor shortages, reduced economic productivity, and potential challenges in sustaining economic growth. Governments may struggle to find pensions, healthcare, and social services due to a higher proportion of elderly citizens. Okay, so what can a country do? What kind of policy can they set? So countries in stage 5 often implement pro-natalist policies, meaning they encourage more children, such as financial incentives, extended maternity and paternity leave, and subsidized childcare to encourage higher birth rates. I used to live in Germany, actually, and if you had a child in Germany, a woman got something like a year off at full pay. The second year, depending on what area in Germany you lived in, was at half pay, but also the husband, the father of the child, could actually take some of that. So they had very, very good maternity and paternity packages. Immigration is sometimes promoted as a way to offset population in decline and labor shortages, although it may bring its own set of political and social challenges. We hear about this in the UK all the time about immigration. What nobody wants to tell you is that, some professions we do need it. Social challenges. An aging population can lead to increased healthcare needs and a greater burden on younger generations to support the elderly. Societal changes, including shifts in family structures and work-life balance, continue to evolve as countries adapt to these demographic changes. Okay, so we're going to look at some specific policies of some of these stage 5 countries. So we're going to go back to Japan. So Japan has pro-natalist policies. So they give child allowances, so monthly payments to families for each child. Parental leave, so they have extended maternity and paternity leave with a portion of wages covered by Social Security. They have work-life balance initiatives to reduce overtime work and promote flexible working hours to encourage family time, because Japan used to be one of the hardest working countries ever. I mean, 15, 16, 17-hour days were typical. High salaries, but you earned them. Subsidized childcare, so increased availability to affordable daycare centers. And Japan's immigration policy. Japan has historically been restrictive on immigration, but recently has begun to relax some policies to attract foreign workers, particularly in healthcare and technology. Germany. Up to 14 months of paid parental leave shared between parents. I think it's actually more than that. Again, depending on what region in Germany you live in. Government subsidized daycare and preschool education. There's financial incentives called Elterngeld, forgive my horrible German pronunciation, provides financial support to parents during the child's first year. There's tax benefits. Families with children receive significant tax deductions and benefits. And again, immigration. Germany has actively promoted immigration to counter labor shortages, particularly from EU countries and beyond, easing residency and work permit regulations. At the time, I didn't have any automatic work rights to go to Germany, but I didn't have any problem getting a job because they needed people to teach English. Italy. Baby bonuses. Financial bonuses for families upon the birth of a child. Parental leave. Paid leave options for both mothers and fathers, though less generous than other Northern European countries. Come on, Italy. What's wrong? Childcare support. Efforts to improve access to affordable daycare through challenges remain in implementation. And then tax deductions. Families with children receive tax deductions and benefits aimed at reducing the economic burden of raising children and encouraging return migration. Incentives for Italian citizens who had emigrated to return, including tax breaks and housing support. Russia. Maternal capital. So a significant lump sum given to mothers after the birth of their second and subsequent children, which can be used for housing, education, or future pensions. There's family support programs, financial assistance and housing programs to encourage larger families, and extended maternity leave, paid leave with job security for mothers, and national holidays. Campaigns promoting family values like day of conception and aim to boost fertility rates. I hope they really don't call it that. And immigration policies. Encouraging the return of ethnic Russians from former Soviet states and facilitating immigration from other countries with historical ties to Russia. Right now, that is in a state of, we'll say, a bit of angst with the Ukrainian war. But hopefully, if that ends soon, Russia will return to a bit of normalcy. Okay, so what can happen in stage 5? So with some serious economic impacts here, you can be labor shortages. With fewer young people entering the workforce, countries face labor shortages in critical sectors such as healthcare, education, and manufacturing. That is why I'm here in the UK. I came over in 2002 because there was such a dire teacher shortage. They let me work without even a work permit. as long as I had, yeah, as long as I could show my documentation, I couldn't work for very long. But yeah, I mean, that's how desperate they were. If you had proper qualifications, they would let you in with, beyond a tourist visa. Pension and Social Security strain. So an aging population means higher dependency ratio, where fewer workers support the retirees. This places financial strain on pension systems and healthcare services. There can be reduced economic growth. A shrinking population can lead to reduced domestic demand for goods and services, potentially slowing economic growth and innovation. And you've got some social impacts. Healthcare challenges. Increased demand for healthcare services due to an aging population leads to higher public health expenditure and the need for more healthcare professionals. Generational imbalances. A large elderly population can shift political priorities, with policies favoring pensions and healthcare over investments in education and infrastructure. Cultural shifts as well. Societies may see shifts in traditional family structures, with smaller family sizes and more single-person households becoming the norm. I believe there's a lot of Scandinavian countries where this is the case. And urbanization and housing. Urban areas may become increasingly populated by older citizens, while rural areas suffers from depopulation, leading to socioeconomic disparities between regions. What happens to the demographic momentum? Well, even if fertility rates increase slightly, the effect of previous low birth rates continues to impact size for several generations due to smaller base population of young people. This delayed reaction is characterized as a characteristic challenge of stage 5 transitions. Okay, all right. That is the end of the presentation. Those were just some spare slides we looked at. So with this lesson comes a worksheet with some exam type questions on it. So I would encourage you to do that. I will have the next part of population dynamics up as soon as possible. I hope you have enjoyed, and I really look forward to going on this journey with you of IGCSE Geography. Thank you very much.